Billionaire was on duty at the hospital when he saw his ex arrive holding a baby. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The fluorescent lights of Manhattan General's trauma wing cast harsh shadows across Dr. Gideon Maris's sharp jawline as he sutured the last layer of a complex abdominal surgery. His steel gray eyes remained focused, steady hands moving with the precision that had made him legendary among his peers. At 36, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that belonged on magazine covers rather than operating rooms. Dark hair perfectly styled even after 16 hours on his feet, broad shoulders filling out his surgical scrubs in a way that made nurses glance twice. "Vitals are stable, Dr. Maris," announced the surgical nurse, her voice carrying the reverence reserved for medical royalty. Gideon nodded curtly, stripping off his gloves with practiced efficiency. Another life saved. Another victory added to his already impressive record. The Maris name didn't just grace the hospital's East Wing. It commanded respect across 3 states, built on a foundation of surgical excellence and business acumen that had transformed a modest medical practice into a billion-dollar empire. His phone buzzed against his hip. The 4th call in an hour. He ignored it, just as he'd ignored the previous 3. Board meetings, investment opportunities, acquisition proposals. The machinery of success never slept, and neither, it seemed, did he. "Dr. Maris?" The trauma coordinator appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. "We have 3 more surgeries scheduled for tonight, and the board meeting was moved to 7 a.m. He glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 2:17 a.m. When had he last eaten? Slept? The boundaries between days had blurred into an endless cycle of surgery, meetings, and strategic planning. This was what success looked like, wasn't it? The automatic doors to the surgical bay whooshed open, admitting Dr. Helena Cross, the hospital's chief pediatrician. Her usually composed expression carried an edge of urgency that made Gideon pause mid-step. "Gideon, I need you to look at something," she said, her voice carefully neutral in that way that meant complications. "I'm not pediatrics, Helena. You know that. This isn't about medical expertise." She hesitated, and in that pause, something cold settled in his chest. "There's a woman in the emergency department. She brought in her daughter. High fever. Respiratory distress. The child is stable now, but what?" Helena's eyes held something he couldn't quite read. Sympathy? Warning? The woman is Arden Blake. The name hit him like a physical blow. Arden, his ex-wife. The brilliant, passionate attorney who'd once filled his penthouse with laughter and challenged his every assumption about justice, fairness, and what truly mattered. The woman who'd looked at him 2 years ago with tears in her eyes and said, "I can't compete with your ambition anymore, Gideon. I won't." "Arden's here?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "With her daughter. A little girl, maybe 15 months old. Beautiful child. Dark curls, striking eyes." Helena paused meaningfully. Gray eyes, actually. Quite unusual. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. 15 months. He did the math quickly, his surgeon's mind automatically calculating timelines and possibilities. Their marriage had ended 2 years ago, but those final months before the divorce had been a minefield of arguments and cold silences, broken only by the occasional desperate attempt to bridge the growing chasm between them. The timing was unmistakable. Luna had been conceived during those last desperate weeks of their marriage, when they'd both been trying so hard to save what was already lost. "Where is she?" "Pediatric Bay 3. Gideon." Helena caught his arm as he started toward the elevator. "Be careful. Whatever happened between you two, that little girl comes first." The elevator ride to the pediatric floor felt eternal. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man he barely recognized, successful beyond measure, respected, wealthy, and utterly alone. When had the cost of winning become losing everything that actually mattered? The pediatric ward hummed with the quiet efficiency of night shift nursing. Soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence of trauma, and the walls were painted in soothing pastels that somehow made the antiseptic smell less pronounced. Room 3 was just around the corner. He paused at the doorway, his hand frozen on the frame. Arden sat in the bedside chair, her auburn hair falling in waves around her shoulders as she leaned over a sleeping child. She wore a simple navy dress that emphasized her graceful frame, and even exhausted with worry, She possessed the same natural elegance that had captivated him when they'd first met at a medical conference 5 years earlier. Her skin held the warm undertones he remembered, and despite the stress etched around her green eyes, she was still breathtakingly beautiful. The child in her arms stirred slightly, revealing a cherubic face framed by dark curls, and when she shifted, opening sleepy eyes to gaze up at her mother, Gideon's world stopped completely. Those eyes were his own, steel gray, intense, unmistakable. Arden must have sensed his presence because she looked up slowly, their gazes locking across the small room. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of 2 years of silence, hurt, and unanswered questions hung between them like a physical barrier. Gideon. Her voice was steady, controlled, but he caught the slight tremor underneath. Arden. He stepped into the room, his movements careful, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. I heard about your daughter. Is she okay? She's fine now. Respiratory infection, but the antibiotics are working. Arden's arms tightened protectively around the little girl. We'll be discharged in a few hours. Good. That's good. The words felt inadequate, almost laughable given the magnitude of what was unfolding. His daughter. He had a daughter, and she was perfect. Tiny fingers curled against Arden's dress, dark lashes resting against pale cheeks, the hint of his own stubborn chin already visible in her small features. Her name is Luna, Arden said quietly, reading his thoughts. Luna Catherine Blake. Blake, not Maris. The choice was deliberate, protective, and it cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. She's beautiful, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, she is. Arden's tone carried warning now, the voice of a mother prepared to defend her child against any threat, even from the child's own father. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. Luna slept peacefully, unaware that her entire world was about to change, that the father she'd never known was standing 3 feet away, struggling to process the reality of her existence. Finally, Gideon found his voice. Why didn't you tell me? Arden's green eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, or might have been old pain. Would it have mattered? You made your priorities clear, Gideon. Work came first. Always. I wasn't going to subject her to that. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and deep down, he knew she was right. The man he'd been 2 years ago would have viewed fatherhood as another obligation to manage between surgeries and board meetings. But sitting here now, looking at his daughter, their daughter, something fundamental was shifting inside him. I've changed, he said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Have you? Arden's question was gentle but devastating in its simplicity. Before he could answer, Luna stirred in her mother's arms, her gray eyes opening to focus on the tall stranger in the white coat. She studied his face with the solemn intensity of the very young, and when she reached out one small hand toward him, Gideon felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. This was his daughter, his child, and he'd missed 15 months of her life because he'd been too proud, too focused, too afraid to try harder when it mattered most. The question that would haunt him wasn't whether Arden would give him a chance to be a father. It was whether he was brave enough to become the man his daughter deserved, and whether he could prove to the woman he'd never stopped loving that some things were worth changing everything for. What would you sacrifice to win back the family you never knew you needed? 3 days had passed since the hospital encounter, and Gideon found himself doing something he hadn't done in over a decade, canceling surgeries. His chief of staff, Dr. Marcus Webb, stood across from his mahogany desk in the executive suite overlooking Central Park, holding a tablet filled with rescheduled procedures and increasingly frustrated colleagues. Gideon, what's going on? Marcus's weathered face creased with concern. You've never missed a surgery, let alone an entire week's worth. The board is asking questions. Gideon stared out at the park where early morning joggers traced familiar paths between ancient oaks. Somewhere in the city, his daughter was probably having breakfast, maybe babbling her first words, taking steps he'd never seen. The thought made his chest ache in ways he hadn't experienced since medical school, when the weight of holding lives in his hands had nearly broken him. I need time, Marcus. Personal matter. Personal? Marcus almost laughed. You don't do personal, remember? That's what made you the youngest chief of surgery in the hospital's history. What could possibly be more important than, I have a daughter? The words hung in the air like a confession. Marcus's tablet slipped slightly in his hands, his expression cycling through shock, confusion, and something approaching understanding. A daughter? With who? When did you? Arden, my ex-wife. She's 15 months old. Gideon turned from the window, his gray eyes holding a vulnerability Marcus had never seen before. I didn't know Marcus. For over a year, I didn't know I had a child. The older physician sank into the leather chair facing Gideon's desk. In 20 years of working together, first as mentor and student, then as colleagues, he'd watched Gideon build an empire of success on a foundation of emotional distance. The revelation was seismic. Jesus, Gideon, what are you going to do? I don't know. The admission felt foreign on his lips. Dr. Gideon Maris always knew, always had a plan, a strategy, a clear path forward. I've been thinking about what Arden said, about priorities, about the man I was when we were married. You were driven, ambitious. You saved lives every day. I missed her birthday 3 years in a row, Marcus. I performed surgery on our anniversary. When she told me she was pregnant, he paused, the memory still sharp with shame. I was reviewing quarterly reports. I barely looked up from my laptop. The silence stretched between them, filled with the muffled sounds of the city below. Finally, Marcus leaned forward. So what now? You can't just abandon your responsibilities here. You have patients depending on you, investors, employees. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm trying to figure out how to be present for the people who matter most without destroying everything I've built. His phone buzzed with a text message. The sender's name made his heart rate spike. Arden. Luna's first checkup is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's office on East 78th. You can come if you want. She should know her father. Gideon stared at the message for a long moment. An invitation. A chance. The first olive branch in 2 years of silence. Marcus, cancel everything tomorrow afternoon. And the day after. Actually clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Gideon. This is non-negotiable. His voice carried the authority that had built a medical empire. But underneath was something softer, more human. I've spent 15 months missing my daughter's life. I won't miss another day. Doctor. Sarah Mitchell's pediatric office was a warm blend of professional competence and child-friendly comfort. Colorful murals decorated the walls, and soft music played from hidden speakers. Gideon arrived 20 minutes early, pacing the waiting room like a caged wolf in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. When the elevator doors opened at precisely 1:55 p.m., Arden emerged carrying Luna in a bright yellow sundress that made her dark curls bounce with each step. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit, her gray eyes, so unnervingly like his own, taking in the new environment with curious intensity. Arden wore a flowing emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair, and despite the tension between them, she moved with the graceful confidence that had first captivated him at that medical conference years ago. She was beautiful in a way that transcended physical attraction. Intelligent, purposeful, alive in ways that made everything around her seem brighter. You came, she said simply, her green eyes searching his face. Did you think I wouldn't? Honestly, I wasn't sure. She shifted Luna to her other hip, and the little girl immediately reached toward Gideon with chubby fingers, making soft, cooing sounds. The gesture hit him like a physical blow. His daughter, their daughter, was reaching for him, and he had no idea what to do with the fierce protectiveness that surged through his chest. She's not shy, Arden observed, a hint of warmth creeping into her voice. Takes after her mother. The words slipped out before he could stop them, carrying layers of memory and longing. Before Arden could respond, a nurse appeared with a bright smile. Blake family? Dr. Mitchell is ready for you. The examination room was painted in soft pastels, with a pediatric scale and colorful growth charts covering the walls. Dr. Mitchell, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, greeted them with professional warmth. And this must be Luna. What a beautiful little girl. Her gaze moved between Gideon and Arden with barely concealed curiosity. Both parents here today? Yes, Arden said quietly. This is Dr. Gideon Maris, Luna's father. If Dr. Mitchell was surprised by the introduction, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and began the routine examination. Weight, height, developmental milestones. Gideon watched in fascination as his daughter babbled happily through the checkup, her personality shining through in every giggle and curious glance. She's perfect, Dr. Mitchell announced finally. Healthy, developing beautifully. Have you started thinking about daycare arrangements? Many working parents find it helpful to. I work from home, Arden said quickly. I have my own practice now. Family law, mostly custody cases. She glanced at Gideon. I understand how important it is for children to feel secure. The subtext was clear and it stung. Gideon had provided money, status, success. Everything except the one thing that mattered most: presence, stability, love that showed up consistently, not just when convenient. After the appointment, they found themselves standing awkwardly outside the medical building, Luna contentedly chewing on her stuffed rabbit's ear while pedestrians flowed around them like water around stones. "Thank you," Gideon said finally, "for letting me come, for," he gestured helplessly, "for everything. She deserves to know her father." Arden's voice was carefully neutral. "Good or bad, she deserves the choice." The words cut deep, but they were fair. He'd forfeited his right to easy answers when he'd chosen his career over his marriage, his ambition over their future. "Arden, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider letting me spend some time with her? Not like before. I just want to be part of her life, however you'll allow it." Luna chose that moment to reach for him again, her small hand grasping his tie with surprising strength. When he gently extracted her fingers, she giggled, a sound so purely joyful that several passers-by smiled involuntarily. "She likes you," Arden observed, and for the first time since the hospital, her expression softened slightly. "The feeling is mutual." He touched Luna's cheek with one finger, amazed by her soft skin and trusting gaze. "She's incredible, Arden. You've done an amazing job raising her." "I had help." The admission seemed to surprise her. "My sister Claire has been wonderful, and there's—" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "There's someone I've been seeing. David. He's great with Luna." The words hit Gideon like a physical blow. Of course there was someone else. Beautiful, brilliant Arden Blake wouldn't have stayed alone for 2 years. And whoever David was, he'd been there for Luna in ways that Gideon hadn't. He'd earned a place in their lives through presence, consistency, love, all the things Gideon had failed to provide. "That's good," he managed, his voice strained. "She should have positive male influences. He's a teacher, elementary school. He's patient, kind, everything." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung between them. "Everything you're not." The silence stretched until Luna began to fuss, tired from the long day. Arden bounced her gently, humming a soft lullaby that made something in Gideon's chest crack open. "I should get her home," Arden said. "But Gideon, Saturday mornings I'd take her to the playground in Riverside Park, near the boat basin. If you wanted to, well, if you wanted to see her again." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even friendship, but it was a door left slightly ajar, and Gideon felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope, terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made Central Park's usual vibrancy muted and introspective. Gideon stood beneath the canopy of an ancient elm near Riverside Park's playground, watching families navigate puddles and soggy benches with the determination of New Yorkers who refused to let weather dictate their plans. He'd been there for 20 minutes, nursing a coffee that had long gone cold and second-guessing every decision that had led him to this moment. What did he know about playgrounds? About toddlers? His expertise lay in operating rooms and boardrooms, not sandbox diplomacy and juice box negotiations. A burst of familiar laughter drew his attention to the park's entrance. Arden appeared, pushing a high-end stroller with one hand while Luna toddle-walked beside her, chubby legs pumping with determined enthusiasm. She wore tiny rain boots decorated with cartoon ducks, and her dark curls were protected by a bright red hood that made her look like a miniature Little Red Riding Hood. But it was the man walking with them that made Gideon's chest tighten with unexpected jealousy. David was everything Gideon wasn't: approachable, relaxed, completely at ease in the domestic tableau they presented. Probably mid-30s, with sandy brown hair and the kind of genuine smile that reached his eyes, he moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. He wore jeans and a weathered denim jacket, and when Luna stumbled slightly on the uneven path, he was there instantly, scooping her up with practiced ease. The little girl giggled delightedly, wrapping her arms around David's neck with the unself-conscious affection of a child who felt completely secure. The sight hit Gideon like a physical blow. This stranger was receiving the trust and love that should have been his by right, earned through 15 months of presence while Gideon had been absent. Arden spotted him first, her expression cycling through surprise, uncertainty, and something that might have been regret. She said something to David, who looked in Gideon's direction with frank curiosity rather than hostility. "Gideon," Arden's voice was carefully neutral as they approached. "I didn't expect— I thought maybe you'd changed your mind." "I said I'd be here." He kept his tone level, professional. though his eyes never left Luna, who was now studying him with the intense focus that seemed to be her signature expression. "This is David Morrison," Arden said, her hand finding the other man's arm in a gesture of support that spoke volumes. "David, this is Gideon Maris, Luna's father." David stepped forward with an open expression, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you, Dr. Maris. It's good that you're here. Luna's talked about you." Gideon's eyebrows rose. "She's talked about me?" "Well, in her way." David's smile was genuine, unthreatened. After the hospital visit, she kept pointing at men in white coats and saying, "Dada." Arden's been showing her pictures. The revelation that Arden had been preparing Luna for his presence, that she'd been actively trying to help their daughter understand who he was, created a complex knot of gratitude and guilt in his chest. Luna began to wiggle in David's arms, reaching toward the playground with obvious intent. David set her down gently and she immediately toddled toward the sandbox with single-minded determination. "She's fearless," Gideon observed, watching his daughter navigate the mulched playground with surprising coordination. "Gets it from her mother," David said with obvious affection, glancing at Arden. Independent streak a mile wide. The easy intimacy between them was evident in every gesture. The way David's hand naturally found the small of Arden's back, how she leaned slightly into his touch, the shared looks that spoke of inside jokes and quiet understanding. This wasn't a casual relationship. This was love, built on foundation of shared experiences and mutual support. They settled onto a partially dry bench where they could supervise Luna's exploration of the sandbox. The silence was awkward, filled with everything they weren't saying until David broke it with characteristic directness. "This must be difficult for you," he said quietly, "coming back into their lives after so much time." Gideon studied the younger man, searching for signs of territorial posturing or hidden resentment. Instead, he found only genuine empathy and an unexpected maturity. "It is," he admitted. "I don't have much experience with this." He gestured toward the playground where Luna was now attempting to fill a bucket with wet sand, her concentration absolute. "Parenting?" David's tone held no judgment. "Being present. Being part of something that doesn't involve surgical schedules or profit margins." David nodded slowly. "Arden told me about your work. Saving lives, building hospitals. That's important. Necessary. But not at the expense of everything else." The words came out rougher than Gideon intended. "I was good at surgery because I could compartmentalize everything. Emotions, relationships, anything that might interfere with precision. I thought I could apply the same principle to marriage, to fatherhood. How's that working out for you?" David's question was gentle but pointed. Before Gideon could answer, Luna abandoned her sandbox project and toddled toward their bench with obvious purpose. To everyone's surprise, she bypassed David and Arden completely, making a beeline for Gideon's knees. "Up," she commanded with the imperious tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Gideon froze, uncertain how to respond. David chuckled softly. "She's decided you're safe. That's Luna's seal of approval. Not everyone gets the honor." With careful movements, Gideon lifted his daughter onto his lap. She immediately began exploring his watch, her small fingers tracing the platinum band with fascination. The weight of her against his chest, the trust implicit in her relaxed posture, created an overwhelming surge of protective instinct he'd never experienced. "She likes shiny things," Arden said softly, her voice carrying a hint of the warmth he remembered from their early days together. "And she's incredibly good at reading people. I've learned to trust her instincts." Luna looked up at Gideon with those familiar gray eyes, then reached up to touch his face with sandy fingers. The gesture was so innocent, so purely trusting, that something fundamental shifted inside him. "Hi, Luna," he said quietly. "I'm your daddy." She tilted her head, processing this information with the seriousness of a judge. Then, apparently reaching some internal conclusion, she settled back against his chest and resumed her exploration of his watch. "She's incredible," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't hide. "Yes, she is." Arden's tone carried maternal pride and something else, a warning perhaps or a test. "She deserves stability, Gideon. Consistency. People who show up when they say they will." The message was clear, and it stung because it was fair. David had earned his place in Luna's life through reliability and presence. Gideon was starting from zero, and good intentions wouldn't erase 2 years of absence. A light rain began to fall, sending other families scurrying for covered areas. David immediately produced a small umbrella from somewhere, holding it over Arden and Luna with automatic consideration. "We should probably head back," Arden said, reaching for Luna, who protested with a whine of disappointment. "No go," Luna declared firmly, her small hands gripping Gideon's jacket. The adults exchanged glances over her head. This was uncharted territory for all of them, complicated by emotions, history, and the presence of a toddler with increasingly strong opinions. "Maybe?" David began, then stopped, looking uncertain for the first time since they'd met. "What?" Arden prompted. "Would you like to get coffee? All of us, I mean. There's a place near my apartment that's kid-friendly. We could dry off, let Luna play with their toys." He looked directly at Gideon. "If you're interested in spending more time with her." The offer was generous, especially coming from a man who had every reason to see Gideon as a threat to his relationship with Arden. It spoke to David's character and his genuine care for Luna's well-being. "I'd like that," Gideon said, his voice rough with gratitude and something approaching respect for this man who was raising his daughter with such obvious love. As they gathered Luna's scattered toys and prepared to leave the playground, Gideon couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point, not just for his relationship with his daughter, but for understanding what kind of man he wanted to become. David Morrison was showing him what presence looked like, what love in action actually meant. The question was whether Gideon could learn those lessons before he lost his family permanently to someone who'd already mastered them. The coffee shop David had chosen was everything Gideon's usual haunts weren't. Warm instead of sleek, cluttered with mismatched furniture instead of designer minimalism, and filled with the comfortable chaos of families rather than the hushed efficiency of business meetings. Children's artwork covered one wall, and a corner play area overflowed with well-loved toys and picture books. Luna made a beeline for the toy corner the moment they arrived, her earlier shyness forgotten in the face of new entertainment options. She immediately claimed a set of colorful wooden blocks, settling cross-legged on the soft carpet with the intense focus she seemed to bring to everything. "She's very determined," Gideon observed, accepting the artisanal coffee David had ordered for him, something with notes of caramel and Madagascar vanilla that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. "Wonder where she gets that," Arden said dryly, shooting him a meaningful look. David returned from the counter carrying a tray laden with pastries and Luna's favorite, apple slices with a small container of peanut butter. The casual knowledge of his daughter's preferences hit Gideon with unexpected force. This man knew Luna's routines, her likes and dislikes, the small details that built the foundation of daily life. "So," David said, settling beside Arden with easy familiarity, "Arden tells me you're expanding the hospital network. That must be incredibly demanding." There was no challenge in the statement, just genuine interest which somehow made it worse. Gideon found himself wanting to dislike this man, to find some flaw that would justify the jealousy burning in his chest. Instead, David Morrison seemed genuinely decent, the kind of person who remembered your coffee order and asked about your day because he actually cared about the answer. "It is," Gideon replied carefully. "We're opening 3 new facilities in the next 18 months. The logistics alone are—" He trailed off, realizing how empty his achievement sounded in this context. "That's amazing," David said with what appeared to be genuine admiration. "The impact you must have, how many lives you've saved, families you've helped. That has to be incredibly fulfilling." "It was," Gideon said quietly, his eyes drifting to Luna, who was now building an elaborate tower with single-minded concentration. "I thought it was enough." Arden's green eyes softened slightly. "It's not that your work isn't important, Gideon, it's vital. But there's more to life than professional achievement. I'm learning that." He paused, watching as Luna's tower wobbled precariously. "Tell me about your practice. Family law must be challenging. Different from your world, certainly." Arden's voice carried a note of pride. "I specialize in custody cases, mostly helping women navigate difficult divorces, making sure children's voices are heard in court." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Arden had become an expert in protecting children's relationships with their parents, while simultaneously protecting their own daughter from her absent father. "It started after—" She glanced at Gideon, then away. "After our divorce, I realized how many women were struggling with situations not unlike mine. Successful, powerful men who genuinely loved their children, but didn't understand that love requires presence, not just financial support." The words cut deep, but they were deserved. Gideon had provided everything money could buy: the best health care, top-tier education funds, a trust that would secure Luna's future. But he'd missed her first steps, her first words, the countless small moments that actually mattered. Luna's tower finally collapsed with a satisfying crash, sending blocks scattering across the play area. Instead of frustration, she clapped her hands in delight and immediately began gathering pieces for a new construction project. Resilient, David noted with fond amusement. Just like her mother, and stubborn like her father, Arden added. But there was warmth in her voice now, the first genuine affection Gideon had heard since their reunion. "Dad-da," Luna announced suddenly, holding up a block toward Gideon with obvious expectation. The simple word hit him like a physical blow. His first dada, not spoken to David despite months of paternal care, but to him, the stranger who'd appeared in her life 3 days ago. David noticed too, his expression flickering with something that might have been hurt, before settling back into resigned acceptance. "She's been practicing that word," he said quietly. "Arden thought it was important for her to understand who you are." "David's been wonderful about it," Arden said, her hand finding his across the small table. "He understands that Luna needs to know her father, even if it complicates things," David added with a rueful smile. Gideon studied the other man with growing respect and guilt. David Morrison had already lost, the exclusive place in Luna's affections he'd earned through patience and daily care, and he was handling it with more grace than Gideon deserved. "Dad-da, up." Luna's command was imperious, arms raised expectantly. Without hesitation, Gideon crossed to the play area and lifted his daughter, who immediately began showing him her block creation with excited babbling. The weight of her in his arms, the trust in her gray eyes, created a fierce protectiveness he'd never experienced. "She's beautiful," he murmured, pressing his lips to her soft curls. "Perfect. She is." Arden's voice was thick with emotion. "And she deserves better than weekend visits and birthday cards, Gideon. She deserves a father who shows up." "I know." He met her eyes over Luna's head, seeing years of hurt and disappointment reflected there. "I want to be that father. I want to learn how. Wanting isn't enough," David said quietly. "I've seen too many kids get their hopes up only to be disappointed when real life interferes with good intentions." The gentle criticism stung because it came from someone who genuinely cared about Luna's well-being, not his own territorial instincts. "You're right," Gideon acknowledged. "I don't have a good track record with follow-through when it comes to personal relationships." "So what's different now?" Arden's question was direct, challenging. Gideon looked down at Luna, who was contentedly playing with his watch again, her small fingers tracing the platinum links with fascination. How could he explain that holding his daughter had fundamentally altered something inside him? That every moment with her made his previous priorities seem hollow and meaningless? "Because I didn't know what I was missing," he said finally. "I thought success was enough. I thought providing was the same as loving. But looking at her," he touched Luna's cheek gently, "she's not a project to be managed or a problem to be solved. She's my daughter, and I've missed 15 months of her life because I was too proud to fight for what mattered." Luna chose that moment to reach for Arden, babbling something that sounded like, "Mama." The easy transfer between parents, the way she settled immediately into her mother's arms, spoke to the secure attachment Arden had built, despite the challenges of single parenthood. "Fighting for what matters is more than grand gestures," David said softly. "It's showing up at 3 a.m. when she has nightmares. It's remembering that she hates carrots but loves green beans. It's being there for the ordinary moments, not just the milestone ones." The man was giving him a roadmap to fatherhood, generously sharing insights earned through daily experience, and Gideon found himself genuinely grateful despite the painful circumstances. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I know I have to prove myself. To both of you. To her." Arden studied his face with the careful assessment of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily. "What are you proposing exactly?" "I want to be part of her routine. Whatever way you'll allow. I want to learn who she is, what she needs, how to be the father she deserves." "That's not simple, Gideon," Arden said softly. "David and we have a life together. Luna's attached to him. You can't just walk back in and expect everything to rearrange itself around your schedule." The words created a complex tangle of emotions. Jealousy that another man had claimed his place, respect for David's obvious love for Luna, and a growing understanding of just how much damage his absence had caused. "I'm not asking you to rearrange anything," he said carefully. "I'm asking for the chance to earn a place in her life, whatever that looks like." Luna had grown sleepy in her mother's arms, her eyelids drooping as the morning's excitement caught up with her. The sight of his daughter fighting sleep, safe and content in Arden's embrace, created an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with professional ambition or material success. This was what he'd lost. This was what he'd traded away for surgical schedules and board meetings. And if he wanted any chance of getting it back, he'd have to learn an entirely new definition of what it meant to fight for something that mattered. 6 weeks later, Gideon found himself in unfamiliar territory, the toy section of an upscale Manhattan department store, holding a list written in Arden's careful handwriting. Luna's second birthday was approaching, and despite his wealth and resources, he had no idea what a toddler might actually want. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Thompson Acquisition needs your signature. Dr. Webb called 3 times. He stared at the message for a moment, then turned off his phone completely. For the first time in his professional life, spreadsheets and surgical schedules felt secondary to choosing the perfect stuffed animal. "Can I help you find something?" A sales associate appeared at his elbow, taking in his expensive suit and obvious bewilderment with practiced diplomacy. "I need a gift for a little girl. She's turning 2. The words felt strange on his lips. "I'm not sure what she'd like. Is this your first time shopping for her?" The innocent question hit deeper than intended. "Yes, it is." The woman's expression softened with understanding. "Well, 2-year-olds love anything they can stack, sort, or throw. Musical toys are popular too. Does she have any favorites?" Gideon realized with crushing clarity that he didn't know his daughter's favorite anything. Her preferred colors, beloved foods, bedtime stories. David probably knew all of it, while he was starting from zero. "She likes blocks," he said finally, remembering the coffee shop. "And she seems drawn to music." 20 minutes later, he emerged with a carefully curated selection. Wooden blocks in rainbow colors, a toddler-sized piano, several board books, and, on impulse, a stuffed elephant with soft gray fabric that reminded him of Luna's eyes. His phone had accumulated 6 missed calls and a dozen text messages during his shopping excursion. The old Gideon would have been answering emails while selecting gifts. This version felt something shift in his priorities, and the change was both liberating and terrifying. Arden's townhouse in Brooklyn Heights was everything his penthouse wasn't. Warm, lived in, filled with the comfortable chaos of actual life. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, toys scattered the hardwood floors, and the scent of something delicious drifted from the kitchen. "You came," Arden said, opening the door with obvious surprise. She wore a simple sundress in soft blue, her auburn hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, and despite the domestic setting, she was breathtakingly beautiful. "You invited me," he replied, hefting the bag of gifts. "I did, but I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." There was no accusation in her tone, just weary resignation born from past disappointments. "I'm here," he said simply. "Where's the birthday girl?" Arden led him through a living room that spoke of careful design on a reasonable budget. Comfortable furniture, bookshelves lined with legal texts and children's stories, family photos that notably excluded any trace of him. David was already there, building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions while Luna directed operations from her perch on his shoulders. "More pillows," she commanded with imperial certainty, pointing toward the bedroom. "Yes, Your Majesty," David replied with mock solemnity, pretending to stagger under her weight. Luna giggled delightedly, her small hands tangled in his sandy hair. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that Gideon felt like an intruder in his own daughter's life. This was what family looked like. Easy affection, shared jokes, the kind of casual intimacy built through thousands of ordinary moments. "Dad, da!" Luna spotted him and immediately demanded to be transferred to his arms. David obliged with good grace, though Gideon caught the flicker of something, sadness, that crossed his face. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Gideon murmured, pressing a kiss to Luna's dark curls. She smelled like baby shampoo and something indefinably sweet that he was learning to recognize as uniquely hers. "Present?" she asked hopefully, having clearly learned the correlation between visitors and gifts. Later, after cake, Arden intervened gently. "Let's eat first." Dinner was a revelation in controlled chaos. Luna demonstrated her advanced spoon skills by getting roughly half of her pasta into her mouth, while the other half decorated her high chair and the surrounding floor. David maintained a steady stream of silly faces that kept her entertained, while Arden moved between eating and damage control with practiced efficiency. Gideon found himself mesmerized by the routine of it, the way Luna's needs seamlessly integrated into adult conversation, how natural parenting looked when approached as a team effort rather than a scheduled obligation. "She's getting so independent," David observed, watching Luna attempt to feed herself with determined concentration. "Remember when she first started walking? We couldn't keep up with her." The casual "we" hit Gideon like a physical blow. David had been there for first steps, first words, all the milestones that marked Luna's development from baby to toddler. He'd earned his place in these memories through presence and participation. "When did she start walking?" Gideon asked quietly. 11 months, Arden replied. "Early, according to Dr. Mitchell. She just decided one day that crawling wasn't fast enough for her plans." "Sounds familiar," he said with rueful recognition. After dinner, they moved to the living room for presents. Luna approached gift opening with the same methodical intensity she brought to everything else, carefully examining wrapping paper before deciding whether to tear or preserve it. The blocks were an immediate hit, the piano producing delighted squeals as she discovered the different sounds. But it was the elephant that truly captured her heart. She clutched it to her chest with fierce possessiveness, announcing Ellie, with the authority of someone naming a beloved pet. "Ellie," she repeated, looking directly at Gideon as if ensuring he understood the significance of her decision. "That's a perfect name," he said solemnly, and was rewarded with one of her rare, brilliant smiles. As the evening wound down, Luna grew sleepy, curling up in Gideon's lap with Ellie clutched tightly in her arms. The weight of her trust, the way she relaxed completely against his chest, created an overwhelming surge of protective love. "She likes you," Arden observed softly, settling beside him on the couch. "She's usually shy with new people." "I'm not new people," he said quietly. "I'm her father." "Biology isn't the same as relationship," David interjected gently, but without hostility. "Trust has to be earned." "I know." Gideon looked down at his sleeping daughter, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her dark lashes rested against pale skin. "I'm trying to learn how to be worthy of it." The conversation drifted to safer topics. Luna's development, plans for her bedroom renovation, the logistics of toddler proofing. Gideon contributed what he could, acutely aware of how much he didn't know about his own child's daily life. When it came time for Luna's bedtime routine, Arden hesitated at the living room doorway. "Would you like to help with bath time?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. The invitation was significant, and they all knew it. Bath time, bedtime stories, the intimate rituals of parenting. These were earned privileges, not automatic rights. "I'd love that," Gideon said simply. Luna's bathroom was a monument to toddler safety. Non-slip mats, rounded corners, toys organized in mesh bags. She approached bath time with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else, splashing contentedly while Arden supervised and Gideon watched, fascinated by this glimpse into his daughter's routine. "She loves water," Arden explained, shampooing Luna's dark curls with practiced efficiency. "We can barely get her out of the tub most nights." "Like fish," Luna agreed solemnly, then demonstrated by submerging her face briefly before popping back up with a triumphant grin. After the bath, pajamas, and teeth brushing, they moved to Luna's bedroom, a perfect blend of whimsy and comfort, with soft lighting and shelves lined with picture books. She climbed into her toddler bed with Ellie, clearly ready for the final ritual of the day. "Story?" she requested hopefully. "Which one tonight?" Arden asked, settling beside the bed. "Three Bears," Luna decided after serious consideration. As Arden began the familiar tale, Luna's eyes drifted between her mother's face and Gideon's, as if trying to understand the new dynamic in her carefully ordered world. When the story ended, she reached for both of them with sleepy determination. "Kiss," she commanded. Arden leaned down first, pressing her lips to Luna's forehead with infinite tenderness. "Sweet dreams, baby girl." Then Luna looked expectantly at Gideon, and his chest tightened with emotion he couldn't name. This simple request, for a goodnight kiss from her father, was everything he'd missed and everything he hoped to rebuild. "Good night, Luna," he whispered, brushing his lips against her soft cheek. "Daddy loves you." As they tiptoed out of the darkened room, leaving Luna to settle into sleep with Ellie clutched against her chest, Gideon felt the magnitude of what he'd been given, and what he still stood to lose. In the hallway, David touched his arm gently. "She's incredible," he said quietly. "Arden's done an amazing job raising her. With your help," Gideon acknowledged, meeting the other man's eyes. "Thank you for being there when I wasn't." David nodded, understanding passing between them. This wasn't about competition anymore, It was about what was best for Luna, and whether Gideon could prove himself worthy of the trust she'd already begun to place in him. 3 weeks after Luna's birthday, Gideon's carefully constructed new routine shattered in the space of a single phone call. He was reading Goodnight Moon to Luna in Arden's living room, their Tuesday evening ritual that had evolved naturally over the past month, when his phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for hospital emergencies. Luna looked up from her position curled against his chest, her gray eyes curious about the interruption. "Dr. Maris?" The voice belonged to Dr. Patricia Hayes, Chief Administrator at Manhattan General. "We have a situation. The State Medical Board is launching an investigation into surgical practices across our network. They're questioning procedures, patient outcomes, financial arrangements. This could destroy everything we've built." The words hit him like ice water. 20 years of building his reputation, his hospitals, his legacy, all of it potentially crumbling because of allegations he hadn't even heard yet. "What kind of investigation?" he asked, stepping into the kitchen where Arden was cleaning up from dinner. "Malpractice claims, overcharging, unnecessary procedures. Someone's feeding them information, Gideon. Internal information. This isn't random. This is coordinated." Arden looked up from loading the dishwasher, immediately sensing the shift in his demeanor. David, who'd been helping Luna arrange her stuffed animals, also paused, reading the tension in the room with the intuitive awareness of an elementary school teacher accustomed to sudden crises. "How bad?" Gideon's voice was tight, controlled. "Bad enough that the board wants you in emergency session tonight. The lawyers are already here. This could mean criminal charges, Gideon. Prison time." The bottom fell out of his world. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, potentially destroyed by allegations he knew nothing about. But worse than the professional implications was the realization of what this meant for Luna, for the fragile progress he'd made in earning his place in her life. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, ending the call. "What's wrong?" Arden's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd learned to recognize the signs of impending abandonment. "Legal trouble at the hospital. Major investigation, I have to go." Her voice was flat, resigned. "Of course you do. Arden, this is serious. My entire career could be—" "Your career." She set down the dish she'd been holding with careful precision. "Always comes first. I should have expected this. That's not fair. This is an emergency. So was our marriage. So was our daughter. But there was always something more important, wasn't there?" Luna appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching Ellie and looking between the adults with the worried expression children wore when they sensed conflict they couldn't understand. "Dad-da?" she said, uncertainly reaching for him. The simple word, spoken with such trust, broke something inside his chest. He knelt and gathered her into his arms, breathing in her familiar scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "Daddy has to go to work, sweetheart," he said softly, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. "No go," Luna protested, her small hands gripping his shirt with determined force. "I know, baby. I'm sorry." David stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Luna, why don't we finish building that tower with your new blocks? Daddy will be back soon." The easy way David stepped into the breach, the practiced comfort he offered Luna, only highlighted Gideon's failure. This man had earned the right to be Luna's safe harbor through consistency and presence, while Gideon was once again proving that his priorities lay elsewhere. "When?" Arden's question was sharp, businesslike. "I don't know. This could take all night. Maybe longer." "Of course it could." She lifted Luna from his arms, her movements gentle with their daughter, but cold toward him. "Come on, sweetie. Let's get ready for bed." "Dad-da story?" Luna asked hopefully, looking back at Gideon over her mother's shoulder. The hope in her voice was devastating. "Tomorrow night, I promise." Arden's expression said everything about what she thought of his promises. The emergency board meeting at Manhattan General stretched past midnight, a nightmare of legal terminology and potential consequences that made Gideon's head spin. The allegations were serious: overcharging insurance companies, performing unnecessary procedures, manipulating patient records to justify treatments. "The whistleblower has documentation going back 5 years," explained Janet Rodriguez, the hospital's lead attorney. "Financial records, patient files, communications between departments. Whoever this is, they had high-level access." "Any idea who?" Gideon asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. "We're investigating, but it could be anyone with administrative privileges. The good news is most of these allegations center on Dr. Harrison's department, not surgery. The bad news is, as chief of staff, you're ultimately responsible for oversight." Dr. Marcus Webb, who'd been silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. There's something else. The investigation specifically mentions your recent absences, Gideon. Questions about whether your divided attention contributed to lapses in supervision. The words hit him like a physical blow. His efforts to be present for Luna, to rebuild his relationship with his daughter, were being used as evidence of professional negligence. My personal life has never interfered with patient care, he said tightly. Tell that to the medical board, Janet replied grimly. They're painting a picture of a distracted administrator more concerned with family drama than hospital operations. The irony was devastating. For the first time in his life, he'd been trying to balance work and family, to be the father Luna deserved, and it was potentially destroying everything he'd worked to build. By 3 a.m., the strategy was clear. Full cooperation with the investigation, complete transparency, and a temporary leave of absence while the allegations were sorted out. Gideon would step back from all administrative duties, focusing solely on surgical practice under strict supervision. How long? He asked. Months, potentially. Maybe longer if this goes to criminal court. He drove through empty Manhattan streets as dawn broke over the East River, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as he'd begun to establish a relationship with Luna, his professional life was imploding in ways that would demand all his attention and energy. His phone showed 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Colleagues, board members, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. The hospital network's stock price had already begun dropping in pre-market trading. But the message that stopped him cold was from Arden, time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. Luna woke up asking for you. David stayed over to help with bedtime routine. She finally fell asleep holding your watch, the one you left on her dresser. Don't break her heart, Gideon. She's already been through enough. The image of his daughter sleeping clutched to his Patek Philippe, a piece of metal worth more than most people's cars but priceless to her because it smelled like her father, created a pain in his chest that no surgical procedure could repair. He pulled into his building's garage and sat in the silence, staring at Arden's message. Luna was 2 years old. She wouldn't understand why Daddy suddenly disappeared again, why work had once more taken priority over bedtime stories and Tuesday evening visits. The choice ahead of him was impossible: fight for his professional survival and risk losing his daughter's trust forever, or prioritize his family and watch his life's work crumble around him. As elevator numbers climbed toward his penthouse, Gideon realized that for the first time in his adult life, success and failure might be measured by entirely different metrics than he'd ever imagined. Gideon stood in his penthouse office at 6 a.m., staring at 2 phones, his personal cell showing Luna's photo as his wallpaper, and his work phone buzzing incessantly with calls from lawyers, board members, and crisis management specialists. The view of Central Park stretched before him, but for the first time in years the symbol of his success felt hollow. On his desk lay 2 documents that would determine the trajectory of his life, a comprehensive legal strategy that would require his complete attention for the foreseeable future, and a simple text from Arden asking if he'd be able to make Luna's doctor appointment that afternoon. Dr. Patricia Hayes had been calling every hour since 5 a.m. The hospital's stock had dropped another 12% overnight, and 3 major investors were threatening to pull funding. The media had picked up the story, with headlines like "Billionaire Surgeon Under Investigation" and "Medical Empire Crumbles," spreading across business and health news outlets. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man he barely recognized, expensive suit wrinkled from an all-night strategy session, silver stubble highlighting exhaustion, and eyes that held a weariness no amount of success could cure. The intercom buzzed. "Dr. Maris, Dr. Hayes is here with the legal team. Send them in," he said, then immediately reconsidered. "Actually, give me 5 more minutes." In those 5 minutes, Gideon did something he'd never done in his professional life. He allowed himself to imagine a different choice. Not the pragmatic, strategic decision his lawyers were recommending, but the choice his heart was demanding. When Dr. Hayes entered with 3 attorneys and a crisis management consultant, she took one look at his expression and paused. "Gideon, we've outlined a comprehensive defense strategy. It will require your full attention: depositions, document review, media management. We're talking about saving your entire life's work. What about my actual life?" The question surprised them all, including himself. "I'm sorry? My daughter, Patricia. I have a daughter who's been asking for me, who fell asleep holding my watch because she missed her father." The attorneys exchanged glances. Janet Rodriguez cleared her throat delicately. Gideon, I understand this is difficult, but we're talking about potential criminal charges. Your personal life will have to take a back seat? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's exactly what got me here in the first place. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. You've built something extraordinary. The hospital network saves thousands of lives every year. You can't just walk away from that responsibility. I'm not walking away. I'm choosing what matters most. He moved to his desk and picked up his personal phone, scrolling to a video Arden had sent the previous week. Luna taking her first independent steps in the park, arms outstretched for balance, face bright with determination and joy. He'd watched it dozens of times, each viewing creating a deeper ache in his chest for all the moments he'd already missed. She's 2 years old, he said quietly, showing them the screen. She won't understand why Daddy disappeared again. She won't care about stock prices or legal strategies. She'll just know that when she needed me, I chose something else. Gideon, Janet said carefully, if we don't fight this aggressively, you could lose everything. The hospitals, your medical license, your freedom. And if I do fight it aggressively, I'll lose her, and her mother, and any chance of being the man I want to become. The silence stretched until Dr. Hayes finally spoke. What are you proposing? Full cooperation with the investigation, but on my terms. I'll provide everything they need, testify honestly, accept whatever consequences come, but I won't sacrifice my family again for my career. That's professional suicide, one of the younger attorneys protested. Maybe, or maybe it's the first smart choice I've made in years. His work phone buzzed with another urgent call, but for the first time he let it go to voicemail. Instead, he picked up his personal phone and texted Arden, I'll be there for Luna's appointment, and for dinner tonight if you'll have me. Some things are more important than work. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's office was the same warm, child-friendly space where Gideon had first begun to understand what fatherhood might mean. Luna sat on the examination table in a bright purple dress, swinging her legs and chattering to Ellie about the colorful chart on the wall. "Dad-da," she exclaimed when he arrived, arms outstretched with the absolute trust that still took his breath away. Arden looked surprised to see him. "I thought you'd be dealing with the hospital situation." "I am dealing with it. This is part of dealing with it." During Luna's checkup, Gideon found himself truly present in a way he'd never managed during their marriage. He asked questions about her development, took notes on Dr. Mitchell's recommendations, and listened when Luna babbled about her favorite foods and games. "She's developing beautifully," Dr. Mitchell observed, watching Luna demonstrate her vocabulary with proud determination. "Strong, healthy, obviously well-loved. You've both done an excellent job." "Arden's done an excellent job," Gideon corrected. "I'm still learning." After the appointment, they walked slowly through Central Park, Luna toddling between them while pointing out dogs, pigeons, and the occasional squirrel with excited commentary. The simple domesticity of it, pushing a stroller, buying ice cream from a vendor, sitting on a bench while their daughter explored a playground, felt more valuable than any board meeting or surgical triumph. "Your phone hasn't rung once," Arden observed, settling beside him on a park bench while Luna climbed carefully up the toddler slide. "I turned it off." She looked at him sharply. "In the middle of a crisis?" "Because of a crisis. Just not the one everyone thinks I should be worried about." David appeared at the playground entrance, clearly coming from work with his teacher's bag slung over his shoulder. Luna spotted him immediately and ran over with delighted squeals, launching herself into his arms with complete confidence that he'd catch her. "Storytime was asking about you today," David told her seriously as he approached the bench. "I think they miss their favorite assistant." "Story," Luna announced proudly. "You tell the best stories," David agreed, then looked between Gideon and Arden with careful assessment. "Good appointment?" "Very good," Arden replied. "She's perfect as usual." "Of course she is, look at her gene pool." David's smile was genuine, but Gideon caught the slight tightness around his eyes that spoke to the emotional complexity of their situation. As evening approached, they found themselves back at Arden's townhouse for what had become their unspoken routine. Dinner together, bath time, bedtime stories. But tonight felt different, charged with the weight of unspoken questions and potential changes. "Your legal team must be furious," Arden said as they cleaned up after dinner while David and Luna built an elaborate train track in the living room. "Probably. They keep calling. And you keep ignoring them. I keep prioritizing what matters." She paused in loading the dishwasher, studying his profile. "What's changed, Gideon?" "Really?" He considered the question carefully. watching through the doorway as Luna explained something complex to David in her earnest toddler voice, her small hands gesticulating emphatically. "I realized that I've been measuring success wrong my entire life," he said finally. "I thought building something impressive meant I was impressive, but she doesn't care about my hospitals or my bank account. She cares about whether I show up when I say I will, whether I remember that she doesn't like carrots, whether I'm here for bedtime stories. Those are small things. They're everything. They're the foundation that actual love is built on." From the living room came the sound of David reading Goodnight Moon in the silly voice that always made Luna giggle. The scene was so peaceful, so perfectly domestic, that for a moment Gideon felt like an intruder in the life his family had built without him. "What about your career?" Arden asked quietly. "Everything you've worked for? Will still be there in some form, whatever happens with the investigation. But Luna won't be two forever. She won't always want bedtime stories from her daddy. If I miss this now, I might not get another chance." Arden was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for something he hoped she'd find. "She's been asking for you," she said finally, "every night this week. Where dad da come back?" The words hit him like a physical blow. His daughter had been waiting for him, wondering why he'd disappeared just when she'd begun to trust his presence. "I want to be here, Arden. Not just for visits or special occasions, but really here. Whatever that looks like, however you'll allow it." Before she could respond, Luna appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes and clutching Ellie. "Dad da story?" she requested hopefully. "Absolutely, sweetheart. Which book tonight?" "Three Bears," she decided after serious consideration. As he followed his daughter to her bedroom, Gideon realized that this simple request from a sleepy toddler, was worth more than every professional achievement he'd ever accomplished. 2 months had passed since Gideon made his choice, and the investigation had taken a devastating toll. Manhattan General's stock had plummeted 40%, 3 investors had pulled funding, and the media circus showed no signs of abating. Yet for the first time in his adult life, Gideon woke each morning with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with surgical schedules or profit margins. He was Luna's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday father now, a role he'd negotiated with Arden through careful patience and consistent presence. Tuesday afternoons at the playground, Thursday evening dinners, Saturday morning adventures that had become the highlight of his week. Luna had adapted to the routine with the resilience of childhood, accepting his presence as naturally as she'd once accepted his absence. This particular Thursday found him in Arden's kitchen, attempting to help with dinner preparation while Luna helped by reorganizing the contents of a low cabinet with scientific precision. "Spoons go with forks," she announced authoritatively, holding up mismatched utensils for his approval. "Absolutely right," Gideon agreed solemnly. "Perfect organization." Arden smiled at their exchange, the first genuinely warm expression she'd given him in years. Their relationship remained carefully cordial, co-parents navigating shared territory with cautious respect. But the sharp edges of old hurt had begun to soften. David was notably absent this evening, attending a teacher training conference in Philadelphia. His temporary absence had created space for tentative conversations that felt almost like the early days of their marriage, before ambition had driven a wedge between them. "How are the legal proceedings?" Arden asked, stirring something that smelled like heaven on the stove. "Complicated, but my lawyers think the criminal charges won't stick. Most of the evidence points to Dr. Harrison's department, not surgery." "That's good news." "Maybe. The board still wants me to step down completely. They think my presence is too much of a liability." Luna looked up from her cabinet project, sensing the serious tone, even if she couldn't understand the words. She toddled over to Gideon and raised her arms imperiously. "Up," she commanded. He lifted her immediately, settling her on his hip while she played with his tie, a ritual that had become as natural as breathing. "What will you do?" Arden asked quietly. "I don't know. Start over maybe. Open a small practice somewhere. Focus on surgery instead of empire building. That would be a big change. Good change. I'm tired of board meetings and profit margins. I miss the actual practice of medicine." His phone rang, the hospital's ringtone he hadn't been able to bring himself to change, but instead of answering immediately, he looked at Luna, who was now attempting to tie his tie into what appeared to be a bow. "Pretty," she declared with satisfaction. "Very pretty," he agreed, kissing her forehead before reluctantly answering the call. "Dr. Maris? This is Detective Sarah Chen with the NYPD. We need to speak with you immediately. There's been a development in your case." His blood ran cold. What kind of development? We've arrested the person responsible for the false allegations against your hospital network. Dr. Harrison has confessed to embezzling funds and fabricating evidence to cover his tracks. The world seemed to tilt. What? The charges against you are being dropped. All of them. We have documented proof that Dr. Harrison planted evidence and manipulated records to implicate you while he systematically stole from the hospital's research budget. Gideon sank into a kitchen chair, Luna still in his arms, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Dr. Harrison? He's been embezzling for over 3 years. When the internal audit got close to discovering the theft, he created the malpractice allegations as a distraction, made it look like systemic problems when it was really one person's criminal activity. Marcus, his mentor, his colleague for over 2 decades, the man who'd helped him build everything. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional setback ever could. Are you certain? Completely. We have bank records, forged documents, even recordings of him instructing his assistant to plant false evidence in patient files. He's confessed to everything. Arden had stopped cooking, watching his face with growing concern. Luna sensed the change in his energy and patted his cheek with small, worried hands. "Dad, okay?" she asked with the intuitive empathy of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions. "Daddy's okay, sweetheart," he managed, though his voice was rough with shock. "Dr. Maris?" Detective Chen continued. "The hospital board wants to meet with you immediately. There will need to be a press conference, damage control, full reinstatement of your position. I need time to process this." "Of course. But sir, you're completely cleared. Your reputation, your career, everything. Dr. Harrison's actions don't reflect on you at all." After ending the call, Gideon sat in stunned silence while Luna babbled contentedly in his arms, completely unaware that her father's world had just shifted on its axis again. "What happened?" Arden asked gently. "I'm cleared. All charges dropped. It was Dr. Harrison, Marcus, embezzling money and creating false evidence to cover it up." The irony was devastating. He'd spent 2 months learning to prioritize his family over his career, discovering what really mattered, only to have his career handed back to him on a silver platter. "That's wonderful news," Arden said, but her voice carried uncertainty. "Isn't it? I don't know." The admission surprised them both. Luna had grown bored with his tie and was now exploring the contents of his jacket pocket, discovering a small toy car he'd started carrying for emergencies. She held it up with delight. "Car? Yes, sweetheart, your car." But his mind was racing through implications. The board would want him back immediately. Crisis management, damage control, press conferences, the return to 18-hour days and weekend board meetings. Everything he'd been stepping away from. His phone was already buzzing with calls. Dr. Hayes, board members, lawyers who'd probably heard the news. The machinery of his old life cranking back to motion, ready to sweep him back into the relentless pace that had cost him his marriage and the first 15 months of his daughter's life. "They'll expect you to return immediately," Arden said quietly, reading his thoughts with the intuitive understanding that had once made them perfect partners. "Probably. What do you want to do?" Luna looked up at the question, her gray eyes, so like his own, studying his face with serious attention, as if she somehow understood that her father stood at another crossroads. "I want to be here for dinner," he said finally. "I want to give Luna her bath tonight and read her bedtime story. I want to take her to the playground on Saturday morning like I promised. And your career? We'll still be there on Monday, but she won't be this age forever. These moments." He touched Luna's cheek gently. "I can't get them back once they're gone." Arden's green eyes softened with something that looked almost like pride. "You really have changed. Being her father changed me. You both changed me." David's key turned in the front door, his return earlier than expected from Philadelphia. Luna immediately squirmed to be put down, running toward the entrance with excited calls of "Davy, Davy." The sound of her enthusiasm for David's return created a complex knot in Gideon's chest. This man had been her constant while Gideon learned to be present. Whatever happened next, David would always be part of Luna's life, part of the family structure that had formed around his absence. "You're back early," Arden called, her hand unconsciously smoothing her hair. "Conference ended sooner than expected. Something smells amazing in here." David appeared in the kitchen doorway with Luna in his arms, taking in the scene with immediate understanding that something significant had happened. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting Luna down gently. "Gideon was just cleared of all charges," Arden explained. "The real culprit confessed." "That's incredible news." David's response was genuinely pleased. without a trace of the territorial concern another man might have shown. You must be relieved. I am, and grateful, and completely uncertain about what comes next. Luna had wandered back to her cabinet project, apparently deciding that the adult conversation was less interesting than proper utensil organization. But Gideon found himself watching her with new intensity, memorizing the way she approached even mundane tasks with such focus and determination. His career was handed back to him, his reputation restored, his empire waiting for his return. But sitting in this warm kitchen, watching his daughter sort spoons while the two people who'd raised her in his absence welcomed him back into their carefully constructed family dynamic, Gideon realized that success and failure might be measured by entirely different metrics than he'd ever imagined. The phone rang again, and again, the old world calling him back. But for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to answer. The press conference was scheduled for Friday morning at Manhattan General, and by Thursday evening Gideon still hadn't given the board a definitive answer about returning to his position. His phone had been buzzing incessantly with calls from Dr. Hayes, board members and reporters who'd gotten wind of his exoneration. He stood in Luna's bedroom watching her sleep peacefully with Ellie clutched against her chest, her dark curls spread across the pillow like spilled silk. Tomorrow would bring decisions that could reshape not just his life, but the delicate family dynamic they'd all been carefully constructing over the past months. She looks like you when she sleeps, Arden said softly from the doorway. Does she? He couldn't take his eyes off his daughter's serene face. I never knew what I looked like sleeping. Peaceful, like all the weight of the world has lifted off your shoulders. Arden moved to stand beside him, both of them gazing down at their sleeping child. It's one of the things I fell in love with, seeing you completely relaxed for the first time during our engagement when you fell asleep reading on my couch. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and unexpected. It was the first time since their divorce that she'd referenced loving him in anything other than past tense. I haven't felt that kind of peace in years, he admitted. Not until recently. The investigation? Being here? With her? With you? He paused, the words feeling dangerous but necessary. I know David is part of your life now, part of Luna's life, and I respect that. But these past months, it's felt like coming home. Arden was quiet for so long he thought she might not respond. Finally, she said, David and I have been talking. Something cold settled in his chest. About you. About us. About what's best for Luna. She moved toward the door, indicating they should continue the conversation elsewhere. In the living room, David sat on the couch with a cup of coffee and a stack of student papers, the picture of domestic comfort. But there was tension in his posture that suggested he'd been waiting for this conversation. Gideon, David said, setting aside his papers. We need to talk. The three of them settled into an awkward triangle. Arden in her usual chair, David on the couch, Gideon perched on the edge of an ottoman like a visitor in his own family's life. I've been doing a lot of thinking since your legal situation resolved, David began. About Luna. About what's best for her. About where I fit in all this. Gideon's hands clenched involuntarily. This was it. The moment David would stake his claim to the family he'd helped build during Gideon's absence. Luna loves you, David continued. She always has, even before you were actively in her life. She lights up when she talks about her dad-da. It's been beautiful to watch. David, Arden started, but he held up a gentle hand. Let me finish. I love Luna like she's my own daughter. These past 2 years have been some of the happiest of my life, watching her grow, being part of her daily routine. But she's not my daughter. She's yours. The words hit Gideon like a physical blow, but not in the way he'd expected. And you? David looked directly at Arden. You've never stopped loving him. I've known it from the beginning. Hoped maybe time would change it, but watching you these past months, the way you look at him when he's reading to Luna, the way you soften when he talks about learning to be a better father, that's not the face of someone who's moved on. David, that's not fair to you, Arden protested, but her voice carried guilt alongside denial. What's not fair is all of us pretending this isn't what it is. David's voice was gentle but firm. I'm a good man, Arden. I'd make a stable, reliable partner, but you don't want stable and reliable. You want him. You always have. The silence stretched until Luna's voice drifted from the baby monitor. She was talking in her sleep, a stream of toddler consciousness that included Dad-da and Ellie, and something about more juice, please. What are you saying? Gideon asked quietly. I'm saying that tomorrow you're going back to your old life whether you realize it or not. The board will pressure you, the media will demand statements, the hospital will need crisis management. You'll have every excuse to disappear back into 18-hour days and weekend board meetings. That's not, it is, David interrupted, because that's who you are, Gideon. Brilliant, driven, someone who saves lives and builds empires. But Arden and Luna need more than good intentions and weekend visits. They need someone who chooses them consistently, even when it's inconvenient. I have been choosing them, during a crisis, when you had no other option, but now you do. Now you can have everything back. Your hospitals, your reputation, your empire. The question is whether you'll choose differently when you don't have to. Arden was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she looked between the two men who'd shaped the past 2 years of her life. David, you don't have to. I do. He stood, moving to kneel in front of her chair. I love you, Arden. I love Luna. But I won't be the consolation prize while you both figure out what you really want. That's not fair to any of us, especially Luna. He kissed Arden's forehead gently, then moved toward the hallway where his jacket hung by the door. Where are you going? Arden's voice was thick with tears. To my apartment, to give you two space to figure out what comes next. He paused at the door. Gideon, she's given you chances you didn't deserve. Don't waste them. After David left, the silence felt oppressive. Arden wiped her face with shaking hands while Gideon struggled to process what had just happened. He's wrong, Gideon said finally. About tomorrow. About me going back to the way things were. Is he? Arden's voice was raw. Because your phone has been ringing all evening and you look like a man trying to convince himself of something he doesn't believe. I turned down the press conference. She looked up sharply. What? Dr. Hayes called this afternoon. I told them I wouldn't be available for media statements, that I needed time to consider my options. Why? Because David's right about one thing. Tomorrow will bring pressure to return to my old life, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough to resist it unless I know what I'm fighting for. Arden studied his face in the soft lamplight, searching for something she'd once trusted and lost. What do you want, Gideon? Really want? You, he said without hesitation. Both of you. This. He gestured around the warm lived-in room. I want to come home to Luna's bedtime stories and your terrible cooking. My cooking is not terrible, she protested weakly, and I want to worry about soccer practice schedules instead of board meetings. I want to be present for all the small moments, not just the emergencies. And your career, everything you built, will be there in whatever form it's meant to take. But this, us, Luna won't be 2 years old forever. I can't buy back the time I've already lost. Arden was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes holding all the hurt and hope and love that had defined their relationship from the beginning. If we try this again, she said slowly, it can't be because David stepped aside or because you feel guilty about missing Luna's early years. It has to be because you choose us. Every day, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. From upstairs came the soft sound of Luna stirring, her sleepy voice calling Mama through the monitor. I should go to her, Arden said, but she didn't move. We both should, Gideon replied, and in that simple statement lay the possibility of everything they'd lost and might still find again. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made Manhattan feel smaller and more intimate. Gideon stood outside Manhattan General's imposing glass entrance, watching reporters set up for the press conference he'd refused to attend. His phone showed 43 missed calls and counting, but for the first time in his professional life, he felt no urgency to answer. Instead, he was on his way to Luna's first swimming lesson, a milestone David had originally planned to attend before gracefully stepping aside the night before. The thought of his daughter's fearless approach to new experiences filled him with something warmer and more sustaining than any professional victory ever had. Inside the community center's pool area, the air was humid and filled with the excited squeals of toddlers encountering chlorinated water for the first time. Arden sat on the bench beside the baby pool, looking nervous in a way he rarely saw her, the anxiety of a mother watching her child face a new challenge. She's been talking about this all week, Arden said as Gideon settled beside her. I think she believes she's already an Olympic swimmer. Luna stood at the pool's edge in a bright yellow swimsuit decorated with rubber ducks, her dark curls contained by an equally bright swim cap that made her look like a determined water sprite. She studied the instructor with the serious attention she brought to everything new. Dada, look, she called, pointing to the water with obvious excitement. I'm looking, sweetheart. Are you ready to swim? I swim like fish, she announced confidently, then immediately sat down, and refused to enter the water. The instructor, a patient woman in her 20s named Jennifer, crouched beside Luna with practiced ease. "Would you like to just put your toes in first?" Luna considered this compromise with the gravity of a judge deliberating a complex case. Finally, she nodded regally and allowed Jennifer to help her dangle her feet in the warm water. "She's cautious," Arden observed with fond amusement. "Takes her time with new situations. Wonder where she gets that," Gideon said, remembering his ex-wife's methodical approach to everything from choosing restaurants to major life decisions. "Actually, I think that's all you. I've always been the impulsive one." Their eyes met across the space between them, and for a moment the years of hurt and misunderstanding seemed to dissolve into shared recognition of their daughter's emerging personality. Gideon's phone buzzed with yet another call, this time from Dr. Hayes herself. Without looking at the screen, he declined the call and turned the phone face down. "Important?" Arden asked. "Nothing more important than this." Luna had progressed to sitting in the shallow water, shrieking with delight as she splashed enthusiastically while Jennifer guided her through basic movements. Her joy was infectious, drawing smiles from other parents and making the everyday miracle of a toddler's first swim lesson feel like the most significant event in the world. "Mama! Dad-da! Look!" Luna called, demonstrating her newly acquired skill of putting her face in the water for exactly 1 second before popping back up with triumphant gasps. "Amazing, sweetheart!" Gideon called back, his voice thick with pride and emotion. Halfway through the lesson, Dr. Hayes herself appeared at the community center entrance, her expression grim with professional urgency. She spotted Gideon immediately and approached with determined strides that spoke to years of commanding operating rooms and board meetings. "Gideon, what are you doing here? The press conference started 20 minutes ago. The board is furious. The reporters are asking questions we can't answer, and the stock is dropping because our chief of surgery is apparently missing in action." Her voice carried across the humid pool area, drawing stares from other parents and temporarily disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of toddler swimming lessons. "I'm watching my daughter learn to swim," Gideon replied calmly, not taking his eyes off Luna, who was now attempting to blow bubbles in the water with intense concentration. "Your daughter?" Dr. Hayes looked between Gideon and Arden with confusion and growing frustration. "Gideon, this is your career we're talking about. Everything you've worked for. You can't just—" "Yes, I can." He stood, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded operating rooms, but now served a different purpose. "Dr. Hayes, I appreciate everything you've done during the investigation, but my answer hasn't changed. I need time to consider my options." "There are no options to consider. You're either the chief of surgery at Manhattan General or you're not. This isn't a negotiation." Luna looked up from her swimming lesson, her gray eyes wide as she registered the tension in the adult voices. She looked between her parents with the worried expression children wore when they sensed conflict they couldn't understand. "Dad-da, okay?" she asked with touching concern. "Daddy's fine, sweetheart. Keep swimming with Jennifer." Arden stood as well, her protective instincts clearly activated by the disruption to Luna's experience. "Dr. Hayes," she said with the polite steel that had once made her formidable in courtrooms, "this is my daughter's swimming lesson. If you need to discuss business with Gideon, perhaps you could schedule an appropriate time and place." "I'm sorry, but who are you exactly?" Dr. Hayes's tone carried the condescension of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "I'm Arden Blake, Luna's mother, and you're interrupting her first swimming lesson." The quiet dignity in Arden's voice, combined with the protective way she positioned herself near the pool, where Luna was learning to navigate water for the first time, crystallized something fundamental for Gideon. "Patricia," he said quietly, "I resign." The words hung in the humid air like a physical presence. Dr. Hayes stared at him in shock. Other parents glanced over curiously, and Arden's green eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been pride. "You what?" "I resign from my position as chief of surgery effective immediately. I'll complete my current surgical commitments and help with the transition, but I'm done with administrative responsibilities." "Gideon, you're having some kind of breakdown. The investigation, the stress—" "I'm having a breakthrough," he corrected gently. "For the first time in my adult life, I know exactly what I want." Luna had grown bored with adult conversation and was now demonstrating her newfound swimming skills for a small audience of other toddlers, her confidence growing with each successful splash. "Look, Mama! Look, Dad-da!" she called, attempting something that Jennifer was diplomatically redirecting into a safer water activity. "I see you, Luna," Gideon called back. "You're incredible." He turned back to Dr. Hayes with calm resolution. "I'll be opening a small family practice, maybe partnering with a community clinic, focusing on actual medicine instead of empire building. That's professional suicide. That's professional resurrection. I forgot somewhere along the way that I became a doctor to help people, not to accumulate wealth and influence." Dr. Hayes stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something approaching pity. "You're throwing away everything, Gideon. Everything we built. I'm choosing everything that matters." After Dr. Hayes left, muttering about lawyers and contracts and professional obligations, Gideon and Arden sat in contemplative silence while Luna finished her lesson with enthusiastic determination. "You really resigned," Arden said quietly. "I really did. Any regrets?" "Just one." He looked at her directly, his gray eyes holding all the love and loss and hope that had defined their relationship. "That it took me this long to figure out what success actually looks like." Luna emerged from the pool triumphant and shivering, immediately launching herself toward her parents with wet arms outstretched and complete confidence that they would catch her. "I swam," she announced proudly. "Like big fish. Like the biggest fish," Gideon agreed, wrapping her in a towel and gathering her into his arms. As they walked out of the community center together, Luna chattering excitedly about her swimming achievements while Gideon and Arden flanked her like protective bookends, he realized that this moment felt more like victory than any surgical triumph or business acquisition ever had. His phone buzzed one final time with a call from the hospital. Without hesitation, he declined it and slipped the device into his pocket. Some calls weren't worth answering. Some moments were too precious to interrupt. And some victories were only recognizable when you finally understood what you'd been fighting for all along. 18 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the small clinic in Brooklyn Heights, casting warm light across waiting room walls decorated with Luna's artwork and thank you cards from grateful patients. Dr. Gideon Maris, now simply Dr. Gideon to the neighborhood families who filled his practice, finished his last appointment of the day with Mrs. Chen, whose diabetes management had improved dramatically under his patient unhurried care. "Same time next month, Mrs. Chen. And remember, no skipping meals just because you're busy with the grandchildren." "Yes, doctor. You sound like my daughter," she said with fond exasperation, gathering her purse and medication organizer. As the elderly woman left, Gideon glanced at his watch. 3:30 p.m. Exactly when he'd promised to pick up Luna from preschool. No emergency surgeries, no board meetings, no crisis demanding his immediate attention. Just a father keeping his word to a 3.5-year-old who'd learned to trust that Daddy showed up when he said he would. The preschool was a cheerful chaos of small children and patient teachers, finger paintings and snack time aftermath. Luna spotted him immediately through the window, her face lighting up with the uncomplicated joy that still took his breath away. "Dad-da." She launched herself into his arms with complete confidence, her dark curls now long enough for pigtails that bounced when she moved. "We made butterflies today. Mine has purple wings." "Purple is an excellent choice for butterfly wings," he said solemnly, examining the construction paper and glitter creation she thrust toward him. "Very sophisticated. That's what Miss Katie said. She said I have artistic vision. Miss Katie is clearly a woman of excellent judgment." The drive home took them through tree-lined streets where Luna provided running commentary on dogs, interesting clouds, and the ongoing construction project at the corner market that had fascinated her for weeks. Her vocabulary had exploded over the past year, and she approached conversation with the same methodical intensity she brought to everything else. "Dad-da. Why do some butterflies have spots and some don't? Well, it depends on what kind of butterfly they are. Different species have different patterns." "What's a species?" "Different types of the same animal, like how you and I are both people, but we look different." She considered this with characteristic seriousness, like how Ellie and Mr. Bear are both stuffed animals, but Ellie is gray and Mr. Bear is brown. "Exactly like that. You're very smart, Luna." "I know," she said with matter-of-fact confidence that made him smile. Home was the townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, the same warm, lived-in space where he'd first begun to understand what family meant. But now it truly felt like home, rather than a place he visited. His name was on the mortgage alongside Arden's, his clothes hung next to hers in the closet, and his coffee mug sat in the kitchen cabinet next to Luna's sippy cups. Arden was in her home office, wrapped up in a phone call with a client, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, and reading glasses perched on her nose. Through the window, he could see her gesturing emphatically as she made some legal point, passion evident in every movement. She'd expanded her family law practice over the past year, taking on cases that mattered to her rather than chasing billable hours. Luna immediately set up her butterfly project on the coffee table, arranging crayons and glue sticks with the precision of someone planning a military campaign. "I need to make more butterflies," she announced. "A whole family. Mama butterfly, daddy butterfly, and baby butterfly. That sounds like an excellent plan." As Luna worked with focused determination, Gideon found himself thinking about David, who'd taken a teaching position in Seattle 6 months ago. They'd maintained contact, friendly emails, occasional photos of Luna that David treasured, updates on his new life across the country. The man had handled their complicated situation with more grace than anyone deserved, and Luna still mentioned Davy fondly when something reminded her of their time together. "Dad, can you help me with the wings?" Luna's request interrupted his thoughts. "Of course, sweetheart." They worked together in comfortable silence, Luna explaining her artistic choices while Gideon provided glue stick assistance and admiration. These moments, ordinary and precious, had become the foundation of his new definition of success. Arden finished her call and appeared in the living room, immediately taking in the butterfly production line with fond amusement. "How was preschool today?" she asked, settling beside Luna on the floor. "We learned about metamorphosis," Luna said proudly, clearly pleased with her mastery of the complicated word. "That's when caterpillars turn into butterflies. Very impressive. And how was the clinic today?" she asked Gideon, her green eyes warm with the affection that had returned gradually over their months of rebuilding trust. "Good. Mrs. Chen's numbers are improving. The Martinez baby is gaining weight beautifully, and I managed to convince Mr. Rodriguez to actually take his blood pressure medication. Sounds like a successful day. The most successful kind." Luna had finished her butterfly family and was now arranging them on the coffee table in elaborate scenarios involving flower visits and flying adventures. Her absorption in imaginative play was complete, giving her parents a moment of adult conversation. "I got a call from Manhattan General today," Gideon said quietly. Arden's expression immediately grew cautious. "Oh? Dr. Hayes officially retired. They offered me the chief of surgery position again." The silence stretched until Luna looked up from her butterflies, sensing the change in atmosphere with a child's intuitive awareness. "Everything okay?" she asked with touching concern. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart," Gideon assured her. "Keep playing." "What did you tell them?" Arden's voice was carefully neutral. "I thanked them for the offer and recommended Dr. Sarah Kim from pediatric surgery. She'll be excellent. Better than I ever was at balancing patient care with administrative responsibilities." Relief flickered across Arden's face, followed by something deeper. Pride in the man he'd become. Gratitude for the choice he'd made consistently for over a year now. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. "Only that it took me so long to figure out what I really wanted." Luna had moved on from butterfly scenarios to building an elaborate block tower, humming tunelessly as she worked. The domestic scene was exactly what Gideon had once thought he was too important for. Ordinary evening chaos, construction paper scattered across expensive furniture, the comfortable mess of actual living. "Dad, will you read to me tonight?" Luna asked without looking up from her architectural project. "Absolutely. What story do you want? The one about the butterfly who was scared to fly? The very hungry caterpillar? No, the other one. The one about being brave." Gideon smiled, recognizing the book she meant. A story about courage and transformation that had become one of her favorites. Of course, after dinner and bath time. And songs. And songs. And butterfly kisses. All the butterfly kisses you want. As evening settled over Brooklyn Heights, the family moved through their established routine. Dinner preparation with Luna, helping, by setting napkins on the table with mathematical precision, bath time filled with rubber duck flotillas and elaborate hair-washing negotiations, and finally bedtime stories read by lamplight while Luna snuggled between her parents. "Once upon a time," Gideon began, "there was a little caterpillar who was afraid she'd never be brave enough to fly." Luna's eyelids grew heavy as the familiar story unfolded, her breathing gradually evening out as sleep claimed her. But she fought it valiantly, determined not to miss a single word of the bedtime ritual that had become as essential to her sense of security as food or shelter. And when she finally spread her beautiful wings, Gideon continued softly, she realized that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing what mattered most, even when it felt impossible. Like Daddy? Luna mumbled sleepily. What about Daddy, sweetheart? You were scared, but you came back to us anyway. The simple observation, spoken with a child's clarity about the essential truths adults often complicated, hit him with devastating accuracy. Yes, he said quietly, kissing her forehead. Exactly like that. After Luna fell asleep, Gideon and Arden sat on the front porch steps, sharing a bottle of wine and watching their neighborhood settle into evening quiet. The streetlights cast gentle pools of illumination, and somewhere nearby a neighbor was playing guitar softly enough not to disturb anyone, but loudly enough to add melody to the peaceful night. Do you think we'll make it this time? Arden asked, her head resting against his shoulder. I think we're making it right now, he replied, his arm tightening around her. Every day we choose this. Choose each other. Choose to be present for Luna. Choose to build something real instead of impressive. We're making it. It's harder than I expected sometimes. The dailiness of it, the ordinary moments that don't feel particularly romantic or dramatic. But that's exactly what makes it real. Grand gestures are easy. Showing up for Tuesday night dinner when you're tired, being patient during toddler tantrums, choosing family movie night over important phone calls. That's what love actually looks like. A car drove by slowly, its headlights briefly illuminating them before continuing down the tree-lined street. In the distance, they could hear the faint sounds of the city. Sirens, traffic, the endless movement of 8 million people pursuing their own definitions of happiness and success. I love you, Arden said quietly. Not the man you were or the man you might become, but exactly who you are right now. The father who knows all of Luna's bedtime songs. The doctor who remembers Mrs. Chen's grandchildren's names. The man who chooses family dinner over board meetings. I love you too. Both of you. More than I ever thought possible. Inside the house, Luna stirred in her sleep, calling out softly for Ellie before settling back into peaceful dreams. Through the window they could see her small form curled under butterfly-patterned blankets, surrounded by the stuffed animals that provided comfort and security in the dark. She's going to be amazing, Arden said with maternal pride and concern. Strong, intelligent, independent. I hope we can give her everything she needs to become whoever she's meant to be. We will, Gideon said with quiet certainty. Not because we're perfect parents, but because we're present ones. Because we show up, even when it's difficult. Because we love her enough to put her needs before our own convenience. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, watching their neighborhood settle into sleep around them, Gideon reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, he'd been a successful surgeon and failed husband, wealthy beyond measure but bankrupt in the things that truly mattered. Now he was a small-town doctor and devoted father, financially comfortable but rich in ways that couldn't be quantified on any balance sheet. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or sudden. It had been built through thousands of small choices, answering Luna's questions instead of his phone, prioritizing bedtime stories over late-night paperwork, choosing presence over productivity. The man who'd once measured success in surgical outcomes and profit margins now found his greatest achievements in a 3-year-old's trust and a wife's slowly rebuilt faith in his ability to change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, patient appointments, preschool pickups, the endless negotiations required to build a life with 2 careers and a precocious toddler. But tonight, sitting on his front porch with the woman he'd never stopped loving and their daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs, Gideon knew he'd finally found the success that mattered most. It wasn't the life he'd planned or the empire he'd once dreamed of building. It was better. It was real, sustainable, built on love instead of ambition, and measured in moments of connection rather than professional accolades. As Arden's breathing grew steady against his shoulder, and the last lights in neighboring houses flickered off, Gideon made the same quiet promise he'd made every night for the past 18 months. To show up tomorrow, to choose love over convenience, to be worthy of the trust a little girl had placed in her father, and the faith a remarkable woman had placed in the possibility of second chances. Some victories, he'd learned, were only recognizable in retrospect. But this one, this warm, ordinary evening with his family safe and happy under his protection, felt like triumph in real time. The question wasn't whether love could conquer all, it was whether love could transform everything, and whether a man could choose to be worthy of the precious, ordinary gift of being needed by the people who mattered most. Would you choose presence over success if it meant risking everything you thought defined you? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, Please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.